Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're taking a close look at some really intense political commentary. It's all based on congressional disclosures, which the source material lumps together under the name Arctic Frost.
Hmm.
Yeah, these documents, they come from investigations in both the House and the Senate, and they're fueling some, well, pretty serious allegations about corruption, specifically within U.S. attorneys' offices and, very importantly, the FBI hierarchy. Okay, let's try to unpack this. Our goal here is to really dissect the main claims from this commentary, the big one.
Yeah.
That federal law enforcement agencies basically set up this huge system, not really to catch criminals in the usual sense, but allegedly to target political actors who were pushing back against the status quo.
And what's really striking when you look at the commentary around these documents is just the sheer scale of what's being alleged. It's not the usual, oh, there were a few bad apples. No, the claim here is that the entire hierarchy, these whole institutions, were compromised. That they were actually built or maybe repurposed to, quote, defend and protect the swamp.
Mm.
So according to this commentary, the documents suggest it wasn't just like an operational slip-up. It is supposedly by design. The source argues the FBI isn't just dealing with a few bad actors, but that the institution itself has become a bad apple for the American constitutional republic.
Wow, okay. That's a heavy charge.
Okay.
It really makes you wonder if this was some kind of deliberate system-wide investigation, who exactly does the commentary say they were targeting? The source is pretty direct about it. It says the operation covered, and I'm quoting here, pretty much everybody that was anybody in Medjugorje. That's still quite broad, though.
Yeah.
Can we get more specific? Who are the kinds of people or groups the source actually names?
We can. And the list they provide, it really paints a picture of an alleged effort to map out and, well, neutralize an entire political movement's ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about really visible figures like Alex Jones, institutional groups like Turning Point, actual sitting senators and congressmen, various other political leaders. And this is critical, all the lawyers involved in advising or defending the movement. So if you take these claims at face value, the message for you, the listener, is that this wasn't supposedly a reaction to a specific crime being committed.
Right.
The allegation is it was proactive, a systematic investigation aimed squarely at political opposition across the entire country, and supposedly coordinated across every single FBI field office at the same time.
That scale is staggering.
Yeah.
Which brings us to how they allegedly pulled off such a massive nationwide thing. The source talks about a specific surveillance technique, the HOP rule, sometimes called the one-hopper, apparently used under certain FISA warrant authorities.
Yeah.
Okay, HOP rule. For people who aren't familiar, that sounds very technical. Can you break down how the source claims this actually worked? How did it supposedly allow for this kind of widespread political mapping?
Yeah, let's dig into that. If you look at how the source explains it, the mechanism is all about, well, exponential reach. Think of it like digital contact tracing, but allegedly for political dissent.
Okay.
So instead of just getting a warrant for, let's say, subject A, the one-hop rule supposedly lets investigators grab data not just on subject A, but on everyone subject A contacted electronically. The source claims agents would pinpoint key political figures or organizations, these influential centers they were really interested in, and then subpoena just massive amounts of their data.
When we say massive amounts of data, what kind of records are we talking about? What does the source claim was being collected?
Well, we're talking about really comprehensive, sensitive stuff. The source specifically claims they'd subpoena all their phone records, all their email records, and all of their bank records. That level of bulk collection is pretty significant.
Okay, so if the initial target, the influential center, wasn't always the main goal, what does the commentary say was the real point of grabbing all this specific data, this phone, email, bank info?
The alleged aim wasn't always about prosecuting that first person for a crime. According to the source, the real objective was using all that collected data to identify, quote, everybody else they're connected to. I mean, just think about the kind of political map that lets you build. Phone records show who talks to who, email records show conversations, maybe strategy, and bank records that maps your donors, your financial backers.
Right.
It allegedly gave them this incredibly detailed, high-res picture of the opposition across, well, all parts of life. And this kind of systemic data grab, focused on broad political association, is described in the commentary as just an unprecedented violation of federally protected civil rights.
The scale you're describing, it really suggests this couldn't just be a few rogue agents in one office.
Yeah.
Which leads us straight to the source's claim about systemic buy-in. If the tool was the HOP rule, how widespread was the necessary approval across the country?
Exactly. According to the source commentary, an operation this big needed total institutional agreement. The commentary really insists this wasn't just some DC Beltway issue. It supposedly required official buy-in from every single FBI office in the country,
Yeah.
which points towards a uniform, centrally directed policy.
And the source material apparently names the positions involved in this sign-off.
Yeah.
What levels of authority in every field office allegedly had to greenlight this strategy?
The sign-off process, as described, allegedly went right up the chain in each local office. We're talking the special agent in charge, the SAC, the assistant special agent in charge, the ASAC, and the office's own legal counsel. All three supposedly had to approve the policy and then implement this investigative approach. And here's the detail the source really hammers on to argue this corruption is systemic, not just isolated cases. It's the alleged lack of any internal pushback. The commentary states very clearly, based on the documents they reviewed, that not one single protest was filed by any of these hundreds of high-ranking officials in any field office about the nature or the scope of this alleged political surveillance.
Wow. If that's accurate, zero internal dissent across the entire country about an operation targeting political opponents. What larger conclusion does the source commentary draw about the FBI's condition today?
Well, they see that silence as basically Exhibit A proof positive that this kind of activity is, baked into the agency's culture now. The source argues the whole institution must be fundamentally broken if hundreds of senior managers just went along with this.
Yeah.
They even provocatively rebrand the agency in their analysis, calling it the Federal Bureau of Instigation or sometimes the Federal Bureau of Violating Your Federally Protected Civil Rights. They trace it back, arguing this culture dates way back to Hoover, but has now reached this critical point.
That's a pretty damning view of the institutional culture. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Let's look at the other side of it. Not just who they were supposedly investigating, but what kinds of actions they were allegedly treating as potential crimes. Because the source claims local FBI offices were actively suggesting that really basic political and legal activities things citizens do every day were somehow potential federal offenses, like mail fraud, conspiracy, false statements, even threats.
Right, and this list of targeted activities is arguably one of the most alarming parts of the whole commentary, because it basically outlines how fundamental constitutional rights were allegedly reframed as, suspicious or criminal acts, predicate offenses. For example, the source claims local FBI offices treated things like this as potentially criminal, giving money to someone who publicly second-guessed the 2020 election. That targets basic political speech and donation.
Just donating money.
That's the claim. Also, filing a legal complaint, filing a civil rights suit, filing an official election contest, or even just petitioning Congress, or, get this, simply filing an open records request to get public documents, all allegedly viewed through a lens of potential criminality.
It really sounds like a commentary is arguing that the very act of using legal or political processes like asking for information or advocating for a cause was itself being treated as suspicious, maybe even criminal. Now, you often hear the defense in these situations, right? That, well, the investigation was properly predicated or the agents were just, following the internal rule book. How does the source commentary respond to that specific defense?
Yeah, they tackle that head on. The source basically argues that defense completely misses the forest for the trees. They say, look, if your internal rulebook, no matter how procedurally correct it seems, on paper actually allows you to criminalize basic constitutional actions like suing the government or petitioning Congress.
Then the rulebook itself is the problem.
Exactly. Then the rulebook itself must be illegitimate. It must be illegal. The source argues that just ticking the boxes on internal policy doesn't give you a free pass if those policies are fundamentally violating protected rights. The commentary's position is that the very foundation of the investigation, the policy enabling it, was corrupted specifically to allow political targeting. So how neatly the paperwork was done is, to them, irrelevant.
Okay, moving towards how this gets resolved, or at least addressed, let's talk about the solutions proposed in the source material, and also the critiques it levels against certain institutional players. The commentary implies this alleged corruption was huge, yet claims some leaders who knew about it didn't act fast enough or decisively enough. Who specifically does the source criticize among well-known figures, and what's the main criticism?
The commentary does name names, criticizing figures like Kash Patel and Dan Bongino. The source expresses disappointment on really two main grounds. First, an alleged delay in getting the full details of this specific Arctic frost information out quickly, even when they apparently had access. Second, and this is maybe more pointed, they're criticized for allegedly promoting or supporting high-ranking individuals who, according to the source's later analysis, were actually involved in what the commentary called the most corrupt investigation in the history of an agency. So the source seems to feel these actions, or inactions, show either a lack of awareness or maybe an unwillingness to do the really tough internal cleanup that they believe is needed.
So given that alleged scale of corruption and the criticism of existing leadership, what kind of institutional fix does the source say needs to happen to actually stop this?
Well, the proposed fix is pretty drastic because the diagnosis is systemic failure. They believe that to genuinely stop this kind of alleged activity, you need immediate, widespread institutional reform and remedy. And where does that start? According to the commentary, it has to begin with firing every single person in a position of authority who signed off on this investigation or, crucially, failed to file that required protest against it.
Every single one.
That's the call. And to really emphasize the scale they think is necessary, the source even suggests potential criminal investigations and indictments for hundreds of agents. The commentary actually throws out a number, suggesting indicting about 500 FBI agents as maybe the only response that fits the alleged crime.
Wow, but the source doesn't just pin its hopes on the federal system fixing itself, right? It brings up this really interesting legal idea about local action. Why does the geography of the alleged crimes potentially give state and local authorities jurisdiction?
That's a really key strategic point in the commentary. The argument goes like this. Because the alleged targeting, especially the tracking of donors and activists, supposedly touched every part of the country.
Meaning it wasn't just D.C.
Right. Every state, every county, maybe every town was affected by this alleged surveillance network. Therefore, local DAs, state prosecutors, maybe even U.S. attorneys in smaller rural counties might actually have the legal standing, the jurisdiction to step in and seek relief. So what's the bottom line here for you, the listener? It's essentially a call for accountability based on these documents brought forward by whistleblowers and congressional investigators like Jordan and Grassley. The source seems to believe that since federal leadership might be compromised or unwilling, the remedy might have to come from the ground up, from local levels.
So, to wrap this all up then, the core message we're getting from the source material on Arctic frost is this. It allegedly reveals a blueprint for systematic, nationwide political surveillance, an operation the source claims needed buy-in from the very top ranks right across the country. Using that technical HOP rule to map out entire political networks and essentially treating basic constitutional rights like petitioning your government or donating to a cause as potential federal crimes.
And maybe here's a final provocative thought stemming directly from that source commentary for you to consider. If the source is right that institutional fixes aren't likely from the federal level, they argue local and state prosecutors could have jurisdiction because the alleged wrongdoing touched virtually everywhere. Just think about the implications of that, a system designed to investigate crime, potentially being investigated itself by the very local legal systems it normally oversees. It completely flips the script on where accountability might come from.